The scream that tore from Evelyn Oakes's throat as she hoisted the 200-pound wagon wheel onto her shoulder made every man in the trading post fall silent. They watched her carry it across the dusty floor like it weighed no more than a sack of flour, her muscled arms barely trembling under the load. And she saw the mixture of awe and disgust flicker across their weathered faces. She had seen that look her entire life, had grown accustomed to the way men stepped back when she approached, as if her strength was something contagious, something unnatural that might infect them if they stood too close. The wheel thudded against the counter, and old Silas Green shook his head with that familiar disappointment she had learned to expect. "Evelyn, no man is ever going to want a woman who can outlift him," Silas said, not unkindly, but with the weary certainty of someone who believed he was stating an obvious truth. "You are 23 years old now, and you should be thinking about finding a husband. But you keep acting like one of the ranch hands instead of a proper lady." She wiped the sweat from her brow with the back of her hand, her dark blonde hair escaping from the braid that hung down her back. "I need the wheel for my wagon, Silas. The axle broke coming into town, and I cannot very well leave it sitting in the street. You should have asked one of the men to help you." "Why, I am perfectly capable of carrying it myself." The other men in the trading post exchanged glances, and she felt their judgment settle over her like a heavy blanket. She had heard it all before, the whispers that followed her through the streets of Evanston, Wyoming. Too strong, too independent, too much for any man to handle. Her father had died 3 years ago, leaving her the small ranch on the outskirts of town, and everyone had expected her to sell it, to find a man to take care of her. Instead, she had rolled up her sleeves and learned to do the work herself. She could shoe a horse, mend a fence, brand cattle, and shoot straight enough to keep the wolves away from her livestock. She did not need a man to survive, and that fact seemed to offend every person in this town. "You will end up alone," Silas said quietly, almost sadly. "Mark my words, girl. A man wants to feel needed. He wants to protect his woman, to provide for her. What is he supposed to do with a woman who can do everything herself?" Evelyn paid for the wheel and hoisted it back onto her shoulder, ignoring the burning in her muscles. "Then I suppose I will be alone," she said, her voice steady despite the ache in her chest. "Because I will not pretend to be helpless just to make a man feel important." She walked out into the blazing July sunshine of 1878, the heat of the Wyoming summer pressing down on her like a physical weight. Evanston sat in the southwestern corner of the territory, a railroad town that had sprung up less than a decade earlier when the Union Pacific had pushed through. It was a place of rough men and rougher living, where the saloons outnumbered the churches and the sound of gunfire was as common as the whistle of the trains. The Winter Mountains rose in the distance to the south, their peaks still capped with snow even in the height of summer. And beyond them stretched the wild country where few people ventured. She secured the wheel to her wagon and climbed onto the driver's seat, snapping the reins to get her horses moving. The ride back to her ranch was only a few miles, but the afternoon heat made it feel longer. She passed other homesteads, small collections of buildings clustered together against the vast emptiness of the land, and she wondered if Silas was right. Would she really spend the rest of her life alone? Did she even want a husband? Or had she simply convinced herself that she was fine without one, because no man had ever looked at her with anything other than discomfort? The ranch came into view, and she felt some of the tension ease from her shoulders. It was not much, just a small cabin, a barn, and a few fenced pastures where her cattle grazed. But it was hers. She had built half of those fences with her own hands, had repaired the roof after last winter's storms, had delivered calves in the middle of the night when there was no one else to help. She was proud of what she had accomplished, proud of her strength and her independence. But sometimes, in the quiet moments before sleep claimed her, she felt the hollow ache of loneliness settle in her bones. She spent the rest of the afternoon replacing the broken wheel, her hands sure and steady as she worked. The sun was beginning to sink toward the mountains when she heard the sound of hoofbeats approaching. She looked up to see 3 riders coming down the road, and she recognized them immediately. The Morrison brothers. Her stomach tightened. They owned the ranch to the east of hers, a much larger spread with more cattle and more hands, and they had been trying to buy her land for the past year. She had refused every offer, and their persistence had started to feel more like harassment than business. The eldest brother, Clayton Morrison, reined in his horse at the edge of her property. He was a tall man with a thick beard and cold eyes that never seemed to blink. His brothers, Wade and Eugene, flanked him on either side, both of them grinning like wolves. "Afternoon, Miss Oakes," Clayton said, his voice dripping with false courtesy. "We saw your wagon broken down in town earlier. Shame you did not ask for help." "I managed just fine," she said, standing up and wiping her hands on her work pants. She had stopped wearing skirts when she worked years ago, another thing the townspeople disapproved of. "That is what we keep hearing," Wade said, his grin widening. "That you do not need any help. That you are stronger than most men." "I do not recall saying that." "You do not have to say it," Clayton said. "Everyone in town talks about you. The woman who thinks she can run a ranch all by herself. The woman who is too proud to accept that she needs a man." Evelyn felt her jaw tighten. "If you have come to make another offer on my land, the answer is still no." "We are not here to make an offer," Clayton said, and something in his tone made her hand drift toward the rifle leaning against the wagon. "We are here to tell you that accidents happen, especially to women who are out here all alone. A fire could start, cattle could wander off, a person could get hurt. Are you threatening me?" "I am just pointing out facts," Clayton said, his eyes hard. "You should think about that. Think about how vulnerable you are out here. Think about how much easier your life would be if you just sold us this land and moved into town where you belong." The 3 brothers turned their horses and rode away, leaving her standing alone in the fading light. Her heart was pounding, and her hands were shaking with a mixture of fear and fury. She was not naive enough to think they were bluffing. She had heard stories about homesteaders who refused to sell, about mysterious fires and stolen livestock and accidents that were not really accidents at all. But what could she do? The sheriff in town was more interested in keeping the peace with the big ranchers than protecting a single woman with a small spread. She was on her own, just like she had always been. That night, she lay in her bed with her rifle within arm's reach, listening to every creak and rustle outside. Sleep came in fits and starts, and when dawn finally broke, she was exhausted. She went through her morning chores mechanically, feeding the animals, checking the fences, hauling water from the well. The heat was already oppressive, and by mid-morning, she was drenched in sweat. She was in the barn, mucking out the stalls, when she heard the sound of a single horse approaching. She grabbed her rifle and stepped outside, squinting against the bright sunlight. A lone rider was coming down the road, leading a pack mule behind him. As he drew closer, she felt her breath catch in her throat. He was the biggest man she had ever seen, tall and broad-shouldered, with muscles that strained against his worn buckskin shirt. His hair was dark brown and hung past his shoulders, tied back with a strip of leather, and his face was all hard angles and sharp lines, weathered by sun and wind. A thick beard covered his jaw, and his eyes, even from a distance, were the color of steel. He looked like he had stepped out of the mountains themselves, wild and untamed, and utterly out of place in the civilized world. He reined in his horse at the edge of her property and raised one hand in greeting. "Morning, madam," he said, his voice deep and rough, like gravel underfoot. "I am looking for a place to water my animals. Would you mind if I used your well?" Evelyn kept the rifle pointed at the ground, but did not lower it. "Who are you?" "Name is Vance Sterling," he said. "I have been trapping up in the mountains for the past few months. I am on my way into town to sell my furs." She studied him carefully. He did not look like trouble. But then again, neither had the Morrison brothers at first. "The well is over there," she said, gesturing with her chin. "Help yourself." "Much obliged," he said, dismounting with an easy grace that seemed impossible for a man his size. He led his horse and mule to the well, and she watched as he drew up bucket after bucket of water, letting the animals drink their fill. He was even bigger up close, well over 6 feet tall, with forearms like tree trunks and hands that could probably snap a man's neck without effort. But there was something gentle in the way he handled his animals, something careful and deliberate in his movements. He filled his canteen and then turned to face her. "I appreciate the kindness," he said. "It is a long, hot ride to town." "Where are you from?" she asked, curiosity getting the better of her caution. "Here and there," he said. "I grew up in Montana, but I have been wandering for the past 10 years. Trapping, hunting, working odd jobs. I go where the work takes me." "What brings you to Wyoming?" "The mountains," he said simply. "The Uintas are good for trapping. Beaver mostly, but some mink and fox too. I have got enough pelts to make the trip to town worth my while." She lowered the rifle, sensing that he posed no threat. "You said you were heading into Evanston?" "That was the plan. Why?" "Just be careful," she said. "There are some men in this area who do not take kindly to strangers." A faint smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "I have dealt with unfriendly men before. But I appreciate the warning." He started to lead his animals back toward the road, and she felt a sudden, inexplicable urge to stop him. "Wait," she called out, and he turned back, one eyebrow raised in question. "If you are looking for work, I could use some help around here, just for a few days. I can pay you." He studied her for a long moment, his steel gray eyes taking in the rifle in her hands, the work-worn clothes, the calluses on her palms. "You run this place by yourself?" "I do." "That is a lot of work for one person." "I manage." "I do not doubt it," he said. And there was no mockery in his tone, no condescension, just a simple statement of fact. "But why do you need help now?" She hesitated, unsure how much to tell him. "There are some men who want my land. They have been making threats. I just thought it might be useful to have someone else around for a while." His expression hardened. "What kind of threats?" "The kind that involve fire and stolen cattle and accidents." Vance was silent for a moment, his jaw working beneath his beard. Then he nodded. "All right, I will stay for a few days. But I do not need your money. Just food and a place to sleep." Relief flooded through her, surprising in its intensity. "Thank you. You can put your animals in the barn. There is a spare room in the cabin, or, if you prefer, there is a loft in the barn with a decent bed." "The barn will be fine," he said. "I prefer to be close to my animals." He led his horse and mule into the barn, and she followed, showing him where he could store his gear and pointing out the ladder to the loft. He moved with the quiet efficiency of someone who was used to making camp in unfamiliar places, unpacking only what he needed and leaving the rest secured. She noticed the rifle strapped to his saddle, the knife on his belt, the hatchet hanging from his pack. He was a man who knew how to survive in the wild, and she found herself feeling safer just knowing he was here. "I have some stew left over from last night," she said. "It is not much, but you are welcome to it." "Sounds good to me," he said. "I have been living on jerky and hardtack for the past week." They walked to the cabin together, and she was acutely aware of how much larger he was than her, how his presence seemed to fill the space around him. She had always been tall for a woman, nearly 5 feet and 8 inches, and she was used to being eye level with most men. But Vance towered over her, and for the first time in her life, she felt small. It should have been unnerving, but instead, it was oddly comforting. She ladled stew into 2 bowls and set them on the rough, hewn table. They ate in silence for a while, and she found herself stealing glances at him, trying to reconcile his size and obvious strength with the gentle way he had watered his animals, the quiet courtesy in his voice. He caught her looking and raised an eyebrow. "Something on your mind?" he asked. She felt her cheeks heat. "I am just not used to having company." "How long have you been running this place alone?" 3 years. My father died, and there was no one else." "No other family?" "My mother died when I was young. I was an only child." "That is a hard life for anyone, let alone a woman on her own." She bristled slightly. "I am perfectly capable of taking care of myself." "I can see that," he said, and there was something in his tone that made her look up sharply. "I have been around enough to know that strength comes in many forms. It takes a special kind of person to carve out a life in this country. Man or woman." She studied his face, searching for any hint of mockery or condescension, but found none. "Most people do not see it that way. Most people think I am too strong for my own good, that I should be looking for a husband instead of fixing fences and branding cattle." "Those people are fools," he said bluntly. "Strength is never a weakness. Anyone who thinks otherwise is just insecure about their own lack of it." Something in her chest loosened, a knot she had not even realized was there. "You really believe that?" "I do. I have spent most of my life in the mountains, away from so-called civilized society. And I will tell you this. The wilderness does not care if you are a man or a woman. It will kill you just as easily either way. The only thing that matters is whether you are strong enough to survive. Is that why you stay in the mountains? Because you do not fit in town?" He shrugged. "I suppose. I have never been comfortable around too many people. I like the quiet. I like knowing that my survival depends on my own skills, not on playing games and following rules that do not make sense." "I understand that," she said softly. "Sometimes I think I am the same way. I love this ranch because it is mine. Because every fence post I drive into the ground, every calf I deliver, every challenge I overcome, it is proof that I can do this, that I am enough." "You are," he said, and the certainty in his voice made her throat tighten. "Anyone who tells you otherwise is wrong." They finished their meal in companionable silence, and when Vance stood to leave, she felt a pang of something she could not quite name. "Thank you," she said, "for staying and for understanding." "You do not need to thank me," he said. "I will do what I can to help while I am here." He returned to the barn, and she cleaned up the dishes, her mind spinning. She had known Vance Sterling for less than 2 hours, but already he had said things to her that no one else ever had. He had looked at her strength and seen it for what it was, something valuable, something worthy of respect. And the way he had said it, with such quiet conviction, made her want to believe him. The next morning, she woke to the sound of hammering. She dressed quickly and stepped outside to find Vance already at work, repairing a section of fence that had been sagging for weeks. He had stripped off his shirt in the heat, and she found herself staring at the play of muscles across his back and shoulders, the way his body moved with a raw, primal power. He glanced up and saw her watching, and she quickly looked away, her cheeks burning. "Morning," he called out. "I hope you do not mind. I noticed this fence needed attention." "I do not mind at all," she said, walking over to join him. "But you do not have to do all the work yourself. I can help." "I am sure you can," he said, driving another nail into the post. "But there's no reason we cannot work together." They spent the morning side by side, repairing fences and checking the cattle. She was used to working alone, used to the silence and the solitude. But having Vance there felt surprisingly natural. He did not try to take over or tell her what to do. Instead, he watched what she was doing and fell into step beside her, matching his pace to hers. When she struggled to lift a particularly heavy post, he was there to help. But he did not make her feel weak or incapable. He simply offered his strength where it was needed, and she found herself grateful for it. By midday, the heat was unbearable, and they took a break in the shade of the barn. She brought out a jug of water, and they passed it back and forth, drinking deeply. "You are not exaggerating about how much work this place is," Vance said, wiping the sweat from his brow. "How have you managed to keep up with all of it on your own?" "I do not sleep much," she admitted. "And there are things that do not get done. Things I keep meaning to fix, but never have the time or energy for." "Like what?" She gestured toward the cabin. "The roof leaks in the back corner. I patched it last winter, but it is starting to come loose again. And the door to the chicken coop is hanging crooked. The hinges are rusted through, and I have been meaning to replace them for months." "I can take care of those things," he said. "It is the least I can do in exchange for food and shelter." "You do not owe me anything," she said. "You are already doing more than I expected." "Maybe," he said, his gray eyes meeting hers. "But I want to help. It feels good to be useful." Something in the way he said it made her wonder what his life had been like before he came here. Whether he had spent so long alone in the mountains that he had forgotten what it felt like to be part of something, to contribute to a shared goal. She wanted to ask him, but she did not want to pry. So instead, she just nodded. "All right," she said. "If you insist, I will not argue." They worked through the afternoon, and by the time the sun began to set, the roof was patched, the chicken coop door was fixed, and the fences were all secure. Evelyn cooked dinner, frying up some salt pork and beans, and they ate together on the porch, watching the sky turn from gold to pink to deep purple. The air was finally starting to cool, and a light breeze rustled through the grass. "This is a beautiful place," Vance said quietly. "I can see why you do not want to leave it." "It is mine," she said simply. "It is the only thing I have ever had that was truly mine." "What did you mean when you said those men were threatening you?" She sighed, setting down her plate. "The Morrison brothers. They own the big ranch to the east. They have been trying to buy my land for a year, and I keep refusing. A few days ago, they came by and made it clear that if I did not sell, things might start going wrong. Fires, stolen cattle, accidents." Vance's jaw tightened, and she saw the anger flash in his eyes. "Have they done anything yet?" "Not yet. But I do not think they are bluffing." Then we will make sure they do not get the chance, he said. I will keep watch at night. If they try anything, they will have to go through me first. The protective edge in his voice sent a shiver down her spine. But it was not fear. It was something else. Something warm and unfamiliar. You do not even know me, she said softly. Why would you put yourself at risk for me? He was quiet for a moment, his gaze fixed on the distant mountains. Because I know what it is like to be alone, he said finally. I know what it is like to have everyone tell you that you do not belong, that you are too different, too rough, too hard to handle. And I know what it is like to wish, just once, that someone would see you for who you really are and not run away. Her breath caught in her throat. Is that how you feel? Every day of my life, he said. And the raw honesty in his voice made her heart ache. I have been alone for so long that I forgot what it was like to be around people who did not judge me. But you did not flinch when you saw me. You did not act like I was some kind of animal. You just offered me water and a place to stay. That is just common decency, she said. Maybe, he said, but it is more than most people have ever given me. They sat in silence for a while, the weight of their shared loneliness hanging in the air between them. She wanted to reach out, to touch his hand, to tell him that she understood, but she did not know how. She'd spent so long building walls around herself, convincing herself that she did not need anyone, that she had forgotten how to let someone in. I am glad you are here, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. He turned to look at her, and the intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. So am I, he said. That night, Vance slept in the barn, but Evelyn could not sleep at all. She lay in her bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about the way he had looked at her, the way he had spoken to her. No one had ever talked to her the way he did, with such respect and understanding. No one had ever made her feel like her strength was something to be admired rather than feared. And no one had ever stirred the feelings inside her that Vance Sterling had awakened with just a few simple words. She finally drifted off near dawn, and when she woke, the sun was already high in the sky. She dressed quickly and went outside to find Vance in the corral, working with one of her horses. The animal, a young gelding she had been trying to break for weeks, was skittish and stubborn. But Vance was patient, speaking to it in a low, soothing voice, his movements slow and deliberate. She leaned against the fence and watched, fascinated by the connection he seemed to have with the horse, the way he anticipated its movements and responded without force or fear. After nearly an hour, the gelding finally allowed Vance to saddle it, and he led it around the corral a few times before dismounting and patting its neck. He is a good horse, Vance said, walking over to where she stood. He just needed someone to be patient with him. I tried, she said, but he never responded to me the way he did to you. You have a lot on your mind, Vance said. Animals can sense that. They need you to be calm and focused. It is not about strength. It is about trust. You make it sound so simple. It is, he said, but that does not mean it is easy. She smiled at that, appreciating the distinction. Will you teach me? If you want, he said, but it will take time. I have time, she said. And she realized as she said it that she wanted him to stay longer than a few days. She wanted him to stay for weeks, months, maybe longer. The thought should have scared her, but instead, it felt right. They spent the rest of the day working together, and with each passing hour, she felt herself relaxing around him, the walls she had built starting to crumble. He told her stories about his time in the mountains, about the bears he had encountered, the wolves he had heard howling in the night, the brutal winters when the snow was so deep he could barely leave his cabin. She told him about her father, about the way he had taught her everything he knew, about the grief she had felt when he died and left her alone in the world. "He sounds like a good man," Vance said. "He was," she said. "But even he thought I should find a husband. He just wanted me to be taken care of." "Maybe he just wanted you to be happy." "Maybe," she said. "But I do not think he understood that I could be happy on my own." "Can you?" Vance asked. And the question hung in the air between them. She did not answer right away, because she was not sure she knew the answer anymore. A week ago, she would have said yes without hesitation. But now, with Vance here, she was starting to realize that being alone and being independent were not the same thing. She could be strong and capable and still want someone to share her life with. She could be self-sufficient and still crave the warmth of another person's presence. "I do not know," she said honestly. "I thought I could. But lately I have been wondering if maybe I have been lying to myself." "There is no shame in wanting companionship," he said gently. "It does not make you weak. Tell that to everyone in Evanston." "The people in Evanston are idiots," he said bluntly, and she laughed, the sound surprising her with its brightness. 3 days passed, and the Morrison brothers did not return. Evelyn began to hope that maybe they had given up, that Vance's presence had been enough to scare them off. But on the 4th night, she woke to the sound of shouting. She grabbed her rifle and ran outside to find the barn on fire, flames licking up the sides of the building, smoke billowing into the night sky. "Vance!" she screamed, her heart pounding in terror. He emerged from the smoke, leading his horse and mule, coughing and gasping. "Get the other animals out," he shouted. "I will get water." She ran into the barn, the heat searing her lungs, and started releasing the horses from their stalls. They bolted past her, their eyes wide with fear, and she counted them as they ran, making sure they were all accounted for. The chickens were squawking in their coop, and she grabbed as many as she could, shoving them into a sack and carrying them outside. Vance was already hauling buckets of water from the well, throwing them onto the flames. But it was not enough. The fire was spreading too fast. "We need help," she shouted. "There is no time," he yelled back. "Get the cattle away from the barn. If the fire spreads to the pasture, we will lose everything." She ran to the pasture and opened the gate, herding the cattle away from the barn and toward the road. The smoke was thick now, choking, and her eyes were streaming with tears. She could hear Vance shouting, could see him silhouetted against the flames, and she prayed that he would be all right, that they both would be all right. It took hours, but finally, the fire began to die down. The barn was a total loss, just a charred skeleton of beams and ash. But the cabin was untouched, and all the animals were safe. Evelyn sank to the ground, exhausted and covered in soot, and Vance collapsed beside her, his face streaked with sweat and smoke. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "No," she said. "Are you?" "I am fine," he said. But she could see the burns on his hands, the way he winced when he moved. "You are not fine," she said, grabbing his hands and examining them. "These need to be treated." "They are just burns," he said. "I have had worse." "I do not care," she said fiercely. "You saved the animals. You saved everything. The least I can do is take care of your hands." She led him into the cabin and made him sit at the table while she fetched her medical supplies. She cleaned the burns carefully, applying a salve her father had taught her to make, and wrapped his hands in clean cloth. He watched her the entire time, his gray eyes unreadable. "This was the Morrison brothers," he said finally. "It has to be." "I know," she said, her voice shaking with anger. "But we have no proof. Even if we went to the sheriff, it would be our word against theirs." "Then we will have to make sure they do not try again," he said, and the cold fury in his voice made her shiver. "What are you going to do?" "I am going to pay them a visit," he said, "and I am going to make it very clear that if they come near you or your property again, they will regret it." "Vance, you cannot," she said, fear gripping her. "There are 3 of them. They will kill you." "No, they will not," he said, and the absolute certainty in his voice made her believe him. "I have dealt with men like them before. Bullies who think they can intimidate anyone smaller or weaker than they are. But I am not smaller, and I am not weaker. And I am not going to let them hurt you." She wanted to argue, wanted to tell him that it was not worth the risk. But she could see the determination in his eyes, the protective rage that burned beneath the surface. He was going to confront the Morrison brothers, whether she liked it or not. And she realized with a start that she did not want to stop him. She wanted him to fight for her, to defend her because no one ever had before. "Be careful," she said softly, and he reached out with his bandaged hand to cup her cheek. "I will," he said. "I promise." He left at first light, riding toward the Morrison ranch with his rifle across his saddle. Evelyn spent the morning in a state of anxious dread, unable to focus on anything, jumping at every sound. She tried to distract herself by cleaning up the remains of the barn, by checking on the animals. But nothing could quiet the fear that gnawed at her. What if he did not come back? What if the Morrison brothers killed him, and it was all her fault because she had asked him to stay? Hours passed, and the sun climbed higher in the sky. And still, there was no sign of him. She was about to saddle one of the horses and ride after him when she saw a lone rider coming down the road. Relief flooded through her when she recognized Vance, and she ran to meet him, her heart pounding. "Are you all right?" she asked, grabbing his horse's reins. "What happened?" He dismounted, and she saw the bruises on his face, the split lip, the bloodstains on his shirt. "I am fine," he said, though he looked like he had been in a fight. "And the Morrison brothers will not be bothering you again." "What did you do?" "I had a conversation with them," he said. "And I made it very clear that if they ever set foot on your property again, I would make sure they regretted it. Clayton got brave and took a swing at me, so I had to educate him on why that was a bad idea." Despite everything, she felt a smile tug at her lips. "You fought all 3 of them?" "Not all at once," he said. "Wade and Eugene are smarter than their brother. They stayed out of it once they realized I was serious." She led him into the cabin and made him sit down while she examined his injuries. The bruises looked painful, and his knuckles were scraped and bloody. But nothing seemed broken. She cleaned the cuts and applied salve, her hands gentle, and he watched her with that same intensity that made her stomach flutter. "You did not have to do this," she said softly. "You barely know me." "I know enough," he said. "I know that you are strong and brave, and that you deserve better than to be terrorized by men like the Morrisons. I know that you have been fighting alone for too long, and I know that I do not want to see you hurt." Her hand stilled. She looked up to meet his gaze. "Why?" she whispered. "Why do you care so much?" He reached up and brushed a strand of hair from her face, his touch feather light, despite the bandages on his hands. "Because you are exactly what I have been looking for my entire life," he said, his voice rough with emotion. A woman who is strong enough to stand on her own, who does not need me to survive, but who might want me anyway. A woman who understands what it is like to be different, to be judged, to be told you are too much or not enough. A woman who sees me for who I am and does not flinch. Tears pricked at her eyes, and she realized that she was falling in love with him, this wild, fierce man who had walked into her life less than a week ago and turned everything upside down. "I do want you," she said, her voice breaking. "I have never wanted anything more." He stood and pulled her into his arms, and she felt the strength of him, the solid reality of his body against hers. He was warm and real, and for the first time in her life, she did not feel alone. He tilted her chin up and kissed her, his lips gentle despite the split in them. And she kissed him back with all the longing and loneliness and love that had been building inside her. When they finally pulled apart, they were both breathless, and she saw the same wonder in his eyes that she felt in her heart. "Stay," she said, her voice fierce. "Do not go back to the mountains. Stay here with me." "Are you sure?" he asked. "I am not an easy man to live with. I am rough, and I have spent most of my life alone. I do not know if I will be any good at this." "I do not care," she said. "I have spent my whole life being told I am too strong, too independent, too much for any man. But you said that was exactly what you needed. So stay. Help me rebuild the barn. Help me run this ranch. Help me build a life that is ours, not just mine." He cupped her face in his bandaged hands and kissed her again, deeper this time. And she felt the promise in that kiss, the commitment. "All right," he said, when they finally broke apart. "I will stay, for as long as you will have me." "Forever," she said. "I want you forever." They spent the rest of the day making plans, talking about how they would rebuild the barn, how they would expand the ranch, how they would face whatever challenges came their way. Vance rode into town the next day to sell his furs, and he came back with lumber and nails and supplies for the barn. They worked side by side through the rest of July and into August, and slowly the barn began to take shape again, stronger and sturdier than before. The people in Evanston noticed, of course. They noticed that Evelyn Oakes had a man living on her property, a mountain man with long hair and a wild look in his eyes. They whispered and gossiped, but Evelyn did not care. Let them talk. She had found something more valuable than their approval. She had found someone who loved her for who she was, who saw her strength as a gift rather than a curse. In early September, Vance asked her to marry him. They were sitting on the porch after a long day of work, watching the sun set over the mountains, and he turned to her with a seriousness that made her heart skip. "I know we have not known each other long," he said, "but I have never been more certain of anything in my life. I love you, Evelyn. I love your strength, your courage, your stubbornness. I love the way you face the world head on, the way you refuse to back down, the way you make me want to be a better man. Will you marry me?" She did not hesitate. "Yes," she said, throwing her arms around his neck. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." They were married in October, in a small ceremony at the church in Evanston. Silas Green was there, looking surprised and pleased, and a few of the other townspeople came as well. The Morrison brothers were conspicuously absent, and Evelyn was grateful for that. She wore a simple dress, nothing fancy, and Vance wore his best shirt and pants, his hair tied back neatly. But when the minister pronounced them man and wife, and Vance kissed her in front of everyone, she felt like the most beautiful woman in the world. They spent their first winter together, learning how to be married, learning how to navigate the rhythms of each other's lives. Vance was used to solitude, and sometimes he needed to go off by himself for a few hours, to walk in the hills or work alone in the barn. Evelyn understood that, because she had her own need for independence, her own desire to prove that she could still handle things on her own. But they always came back together at the end of the day. And those evenings spent talking and laughing and holding each other were worth more than all the solitude in the world. By spring, Evelyn realized she was pregnant. She told Vance one morning over breakfast, and the look of wonder and joy on his face made her cry. He knelt beside her chair and pressed his ear to her stomach, even though it was far too early to hear anything. And he promised that he would be the best father he could be. "I never thought I would have this," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "A wife, a child, a home. I thought I was meant to spend my life alone." "You are not alone anymore," she said, running her fingers through his hair. "You have me, you have us." Their son was born in December of 1879, a healthy, squalling baby with dark hair and his father's gray eyes. They named him William, after Evelyn's father, and Vance held him with a tenderness that belied his rough exterior. He was a devoted father, patient and gentle. And Evelyn watched him with their son and fell in love with him all over again. The ranch prospered over the next few years. With Vance's help, they expanded their herd, built new fences, and repaired the cabin until it was comfortable and sturdy. The Morrison brothers kept their distance, and eventually they sold their ranch and moved on, leaving Evelyn and Vance in peace. The people in Evanston slowly began to accept them, though there were always a few who muttered about the mountain man and the woman who was too strong for her own good. But Evelyn did not care. She had everything she had ever wanted. In 1881, their second child was born, a daughter they named Clara. She had her mother's blonde hair and her father's determination, and from the moment she could walk, she was following Vance around the ranch, insisting on helping with every task. Evelyn watched them together and smiled, knowing that Clara would grow up seeing her father treat her mother as an equal, seeing that strength in a woman was something to be admired. By 1883, the ranch was thriving, and Vance had become something of a legend in the area. People knew him as the mountain man who had come down from the Winter and married Evelyn Oakes, the man who could track a deer through a snowstorm and shoe a horse with his eyes closed. He was respected, even feared by some, but he was also known as a fair and honest man, someone who would help a neighbor in need and who would never back down from a fight if it was justified. Evelyn had never been happier. The loneliness that had haunted her for so long was gone, replaced by the warmth of her family, the satisfaction of her work, and the deep, abiding love she felt for Vance. He was her partner in every sense of the word, her equal, her match. And when they lay in bed at night, his arms around her, she would think back to that day when he had ridden up to her well, a stranger asking for water, and she would thank God that she had taken a chance on him. One evening in the summer of 1884, they were sitting on the porch as they often did, watching William and Clara play in the yard. William was 4 now, and Clara was 3, and they were chasing each other around, their laughter ringing out in the warm air. Vance reached over and took Evelyn's hand, lacing his fingers through hers. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked quietly. "Marrying me, giving up your independence?" She looked at him in surprise. "I did not give up my independence," she said. "I just found someone who understands that independence and partnership are not mutually exclusive. I am still strong. I am still capable. But now I have someone to share the burden with, someone to celebrate the victories with. I would never regret that." "Good," he said, squeezing her hand. because I have never regretted a single moment since the day I met you. You are the best thing that ever happened to me." She leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him, the steady beat of his heart. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me too," she said. "You saw me for who I really was, and you did not run away. You said my strength was exactly what you needed, and you made me believe it." "It was," he said. "It is. I need you, Evelyn. Not because I am weak, but because you make me stronger. You make me want to be the man you deserve." "You already are," she said, her voice soft. "You always have been." They sat in silence for a while, watching their children play, and Evelyn felt a deep, profound gratitude for the life they had built together. It had not been easy. There had been hard winters and failed crops and sickness and worry. But they had faced it all together, and they had come through stronger for it. In 1886, their third child was born, another son they named James. He was a calm, quiet baby, content to watch the world around him with wide, curious eyes. Vance doted on him, just as he had with William and Clara, and Evelyn marveled at how easily he had taken to fatherhood, how naturally it seemed to come to him despite his rough upbringing. The children grew, and the years passed, and the ranch became a place of laughter and love, a place where strength was celebrated and differences were embraced. William grew tall and strong like his father, with a love for the mountains and the wild places. Clara was fierce and independent, insisting on learning to rope and ride as well as any boy. James was the gentle one, the peacemaker, with a love for animals and a talent for healing. Evelyn taught them all to read and write, to work hard and treat others with respect. Vance taught them to track and hunt, to survive in the wilderness, to stand up for what was right even when it was difficult. Together, they raised their children to be strong, capable, and kind, to understand that true strength was not about dominating others, but about lifting them up. In 1890, when William was 10, Clara was 9, and James was 4, a terrible drought hit the area. The grass turned brown, the wells ran low, and many of the smaller ranches were forced to sell their land and move on. But Evelyn and Vance refused to give up. They dug deeper wells, rationed their water, and worked from dawn to dusk to keep their cattle alive. It was the hardest year they had ever faced, but they faced it together. And when the rains finally came in the fall, they stood on their porch and watched the land turn green again, their arms around each other, their children at their feet. "We did it," Evelyn said, her voice filled with wonder. "We survived." "We always do," Vance said, kissing the top of her head, "because we are stronger together." The years continued to pass, and the children grew into young adults. William fell in love with a girl from town, the daughter of the blacksmith, and they were married in 1895. Clara decided she wanted to be a veterinarian, a rare choice for a woman at the time. But Evelyn and Vance supported her, knowing that she had the intelligence and determination to succeed. James stayed on the ranch, content to work alongside his parents, and Evelyn was grateful for his steady, calming presence. In 1898, Evelyn and Vance celebrated their 20th wedding anniversary. They were both older now, their hair streaked with gray, their bodies bearing the marks of decades of hard work. But they were still strong, still vital, and they were still deeply in love. They invited the whole town to the ranch for a celebration, and people came from miles around to honor the couple who had defied expectations and built a life on their own terms. Silas Green, now in his 80s, made the journey from town to speak at the celebration. He stood on the porch and looked out at the crowd, his voice quavering but clear. "I remember the day Evelyn Oakes walked into my trading post carrying a wagon wheel like it weighed nothing," he said. "And I remember telling her that no man would ever want a woman that strong. I was wrong, dead wrong. Because what Evelyn needed was not a man who was intimidated by her strength, but a man who was strong enough to match it. And Vance Sterling is that man. Together, they have built something beautiful, something lasting, and they have shown all of us that strength comes in many forms. I am proud to call them my friends." The crowd cheered, and Evelyn felt tears sting her eyes. She looked at Vance, and he was smiling at her. That rare, beautiful smile that still made her heart skip a beat even after all these years. "I love you," she mouthed. And he mouthed it back. That night, after the guests had gone home and the children were asleep, Evelyn and Vance sat on the porch one last time, watching the stars come out. The night was cool and clear, and the sounds of the ranch, the lowing of cattle, the rustling of the wind through the grass, were as familiar and comforting as a lullaby. "Do you ever miss the mountains?" Evelyn asked, her head resting on Vance's shoulder. "Sometimes," he admitted, "but I would not trade this life for anything. The mountains were where I learned to survive, but here, with you, is where I learned to live." She smiled, feeling the warmth of his words settle over her like a blanket. "I am glad you stayed." "I am too," he said. "You told me that your strength was exactly what I needed, and you were right. But what I did not know then was that you needed me too. Not because you were weak, but because you were strong enough to let someone in." "I almost did not," she said. "I almost let my pride and my fear keep me alone forever. But you made me see that needing someone does not make me weak. It makes me human." "We are all human," he said. "We all need connection, love, purpose. And I found all of that with you." They sat in silence for a long time, holding hands, watching the stars, and feeling the deep, abiding peace that came from a life well lived, a love well earned. They had faced hardship and danger, loss and struggle. But they had faced it together, and that had made all the difference. In the years that followed, they watched their children build their own lives. William and his wife had 3 children, and they took over the management of the ranch, allowing Evelyn and Vance to slow down and enjoy their grandchildren. Clara graduated from veterinary school and opened a practice in Evanston, becoming the first female veterinarian in the territory. James married a quiet, kind woman who loved the ranch as much as he did, and they had 2 children who were the light of Evelyn and Vance's later years. Evelyn and Vance grew old together, their bodies slowing, but their spirits undiminished. They still took walks around the ranch, still sat on the porch in the evenings, still held hands, and talked about everything and nothing. And when people asked them the secret to a happy marriage, they always gave the same answer: respect, trust, and the understanding that true partnership means celebrating each other's strengths rather than fearing them. In the spring of 1910, Vance fell ill. It started as a cough, and Evelyn tried every remedy she knew, but nothing seemed to help. By June, it was clear that he was not going to recover, and Evelyn moved their bed to the porch so he could see the mountains one last time. She sat beside him every day, holding his hand, talking to him about their life together, about their children and grandchildren, about all the things they had accomplished. "I am not afraid," he said one evening, his voice weak but steady. "I have lived a good life, a life full of love and purpose, and I have you to thank for that." "Do not talk like that," she said, her voice breaking. "You are not going anywhere." "Evelyn," he said gently, squeezing her hand, "we both know I am. But that is all right. I am ready. I just want you to know that loving you has been the greatest adventure of my life." She could not hold back the tears any longer, and they streamed down her face as she leaned down to kiss him. "I love you," she said. "I have loved you since the day you said my strength was exactly what you needed. You changed my life, Vance. You made me believe in love. And you made me believe I deserved it," he said, his gray eyes soft and full of love. "Promise me you will not give up. Promise me you will keep living, keep being strong, keep loving our family." "I promise," she said, though the thought of life without him was unbearable. He passed away that night, peacefully, with Evelyn holding his hand and their children and grandchildren gathered around. Evelyn felt a piece of her soul go with him, but she also felt the strength he had given her, the courage to face whatever came next. She buried him on a hill overlooking the ranch, where he could see the mountains he had loved and the land they had built together. The grief was crushing at first, and there were days when Evelyn did not think she could go on. But she had made a promise to Vance, and she was determined to keep it. She threw herself into the ranch, into her family, into the life they had built together. She watched her grandchildren grow, saw Clara's practice thrive, saw William expand the ranch until it was one of the most successful in the territory. And every evening, she would sit on the porch and talk to Vance, telling him about her day, about the things the children were doing, about how much she missed him. Evelyn Oakes Sterling lived to be 87 years old, a formidable woman who never lost her strength or her independence. She was respected and loved by everyone who knew her. And when she finally passed away in 1932, surrounded by her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, she did so with a smile on her face, knowing that she was about to be reunited with the man who had seen her for who she truly was and had loved her all the more for it. Her grandson, William's eldest son, stood at her funeral and told the story of how Evelyn and Vance had met, how she had been told she was too strong for any man, and how Vance had said that was exactly what he needed. He told the story of their love, their partnership, their strength, and as he spoke, everyone in the church understood that they were not just mourning one woman, but celebrating a love that had transcended time and circumstance, a love that had built a legacy that would last for generations. Evelyn and Vance were buried side by side on the hill overlooking the ranch, and on their shared headstone were the words, "She was strong, he was stronger. Together, they were unstoppable." And every year their descendants would gather at that hill, would stand beneath the vast Wyoming sky, and would remember the mountain man and the woman who had been told she was too much, and who had found in each other exactly what they needed.